The Chicago Bears are carrying some real risk on their roster right now because there's a few spots on this team where they're one injury away from a major problem.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first ticket purchase. Terms and conditions apply. And on the show today, I want to look at where the risk lies on this Bears roster right now with a particular lack of depth at edge rusher and on the offensive line. And I really want to encapsulate just what kind of risk they face if they don't address those spots, and then we'll get to a couple of others at the end with better upgraded depth. Because, of course, every team always wants to upgrade their depth, and you can never have backups that are too good. And, of course, every position you could use an upgrade for. But there are some spots where, an injury is going to be tough, but you'll be able to get by. And then there's other spots where an injury is really going to derail a lot of what you want to do as a team, and it feels like those are the holes that really need to be plugged, and everything else you can kind of survive with if there's an injury here or there. Because, of course, all injuries are troublesome, but some are more troublesome than others, depending on what you have on your roster. And I think that's one of the differences we see between, the really successful teams and the less successful teams. Is not that the good teams get hurt less, because maybe there's always some luck involved with some of that, but the good teams have better depth. They're more able to overcome the injuries that they do have because the other players they have to step up are better and rise to that occasion, and perhaps are coached better as well, is a big part of that factor. But we'll take a look at just how much the Bears might be missing and how devastating an injury could be at some of these key spots where they don't have enough depth, like the edge rusher position on the defensive line. I think on the interior, they're doing just fine with Javon Dexter and Grady Jarrett and Andrew Billings, and they drafted Shamar Turner in the second round. They still have Zach Pickens as a former third-round pick. They traded for Chris Williams the last preseason. They've got some names and some depth on the interior. But the edge continues to be the biggest hole left on this roster, in my opinion, behind Montez Sweat and Dayo Odeyingbo. They don't really have that true number 3 edge rusher to rotate in there. It's Austin Booker. It's Dominique Robinson. They brought back Daniel Hardy and Jamry Croma, although Hardy's been rotating in at linebacker and not on the defensive line for the entirety of the offseason. So there's some potential playing time available there. They added a couple undrafted free agents, but there's really not anybody proven with any kind of NFL productivity behind Montez Sweat and Dayo Odeyingbo. And the good news is that Montez Sweat and Dayo Odeyingbo have been two of the most durable pass rushers you could ask for. If you look across Montez Sweat's career in the last 3 years, he's missed one game. It was this past season, and really he's only had one season with any kind of super significant injury, but almost every year he's playing 16 or 17 games. So, okay, you're not worried about injury history being a major problem there. And same thing for Dayo Odeyingbo, who hasn't missed a game his last 3 seasons there in the Indianapolis Colts, not since his rookie season has he missed a game. But the problem with the edge rusher position is that even when your guys are fully healthy, they are rotating a lot. In order to keep them fresh and be the most productive edge defender they can be, they aren't going to be on the field for 100% of the snaps, even when they're healthy. I mean, really, realistically, even in a fully healthy season, it's maybe at most 70% of the snaps, but realistically, you're going to have sometimes guys kicking into the inside, and so you're going to need even more edge rushers out on the field. When they move Dayo Odeyingbo and Montez Sweat around, there's a lot of edge rusher playing time here for the Chicago Bears, even separate from an injury, and then you add in an injury and it becomes, that much more troublesome. But like when you look at how the Bears used their edge rushers last season, just in terms of out of the total number of defensive snaps the Bears had last season, DeMarcus Walker was on the field for about 70% of them. Montez Sweat was on the field for about 60% of them, which includes missing one whole game, which is why Sweat's number is a little bit lower there. But then Darrell Taylor played 35%, Austin Booker 27%, Jacob Martin 21%, Dominic Robinson down at 8%. And so when you cut DeMarcus Walker, who was on the field for 70% of the defensive snaps last season, you don't bring back Darrell Taylor, who's on the field for 35% of the snaps. You don't bring back Jacob Martin, who's on the field for 21% of the snaps. All of a sudden, you have a lot of snaps that need to be filled, and the only addition the Bears made at edge rusher is Dayo Odeyingbo, who, to his credit, was on the field for about 65% of the Bears snaps, or excuse me, of the Colts defensive snaps last season. So he can kind of plug and fill a lot of the DeMarcus Walker snaps there, and probably can play even a little bit more than 65%. And maybe he can hit that 70% that Walker was at. And maybe Montez Sweat can go from 58 to up to more like 65 if he plays in all 17 games. So, okay, you're starting to fill a decent amount of playing time there, but you're still got to replace Darrell Taylor snaps and Jacob Martin snaps. And all you've got are Austin Booker, Dominic Robinson, and some undrafted free agents. And so are you expecting Austin Booker to be on the field for 40% of the Bears' defensive snaps this season? Can you rely on a second-year, fifth-round pick who was okay, had a couple of flashes here or there, but what did not look like an every-down player, a 1.5 sacks in a light rotation last season? Or do you use Dominic Robinson, who has been a starter before back in 2022 as a rookie, but was a healthy scratch by the Eberflus regime for most of 2024. And so it's like, does he go from playing in 8% of the snaps last year to now being a major player in this edge rusher group? Like, it just feels like even if everyone stays healthy, the Bears don't have enough options to rotate with Sweat and Odeyingbo. And then you add in the possibility that either one of them could miss a game here or there. Then are you starting Austin Booker at the edge rusher spot? Are you starting Dominic Robinson at the edge rusher spot? Like, those don't feel like starting caliber NFL defensive ends in a defense that you hope can get back to being a top 10, top 5 type of unit and more aggressive under Dennis Allen. So that's why I keep emphasizing this offseason. It feels imperative. Like it's getting to the point where I'm almost assuming they're going to add some kind of edge rusher, because they can't look at this edge rusher group and say, yep, that should be good. We don't need anything else here. Whether it's Zadarius Smith from the Lions or Preston Smith from the Steelers or Matthew Judon from the Falcons or Jalen Reeves-Maybin from the Lions. It's been a little more of like an outside linebacker, not as much of an edge rusher, but Teno Passano from the Saints. Like, there are other veteran players out there in free agency that aren't going to cost you a lot of money, but can still really be a big boost for this defensive line and fill some of this void that definitely still exists, just to mitigate some of the risk there, right? You're not going to find a backup who's going to be a guy you would love to have to start every week. You're not going to have starters as a backup at every position, but can you just get a little bit more proven of a depth than Austin Booker and Dominic Robinson right now? I think it would relieve a lot of that concern and a lot of that risk for what the Bears need to get up front, because they're going to need a strong, consistent pass rush from the edge rushing position in order for this defense to be everything they need it to be. And right now, this group, as it stands right now, doesn't have enough to support Sweat and Dayo Odeyingbo. I feel similarly about the depth on the interior of the offensive line in particular, but offensive tackle is part of this conversation too, where it's like, yeah, your starting five or your starting group, you could feel pretty good about everywhere on this Bears roster. They've got a good starting lineup, but that feels like a spot where an injury here or there could really devastate you up front and derail everything you want to do on offense, to the point where it feels worth going and getting one more veteran to help up front. So we'll take a look at the offensive line and the risk for injury that comes with that group in particular next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at Gametime, the best way to get tickets for all of your favorite live events. I've got the Gametime app on my phone, and I use it all the time. I've gone to Bears games on Gametime, and I've got concert tickets tonight as we're recording this to go see Wu-Tang Clan at the United Center in Chicago. Going to be a great concert, and I got my tickets on the Gametime app, because in Gametime, they make it buying They make ticket buying fast and simple, where you can see your view from the seat before you make your purchase, so you know exactly what you're getting. And they've got a lowest price guarantee. You're not going to find a lower price anywhere else on any other app. Even as you get closer to the start of the concert or the game or the theater show, whatever it is, the prices go down. So you're always going to find great last minute deals. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem our code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So defensive end edge rusher depth, to me, is going to be important regardless of injury, because you're going to need players to rotate in there even while your players are healthy. On the offensive line, you're not going to have that same dynamic. When healthy, we know what the 5 is, we know who they are, we know the order they're going to play in, and there's no one rotating in with a healthy Chicago Bears offensive line. But when in our lifetimes have we consistently had a healthy Chicago Bears offensive line? I think we've had some stretches every once in a while where it does happen, but 2024 was definitely not one of those seasons. And generally, you're always going to lose at least one guy for at least a few games. Like you don't find an NFL offensive line across the board where all 5 players played every snap or all 5 players started every game. Like teams always have different offensive lineups over the course of the year because injuries just happen. Even the best teams, even the worst teams, there's no avoiding injuries. And so you can essentially guarantee that at least one of the Bears starting 5 offensive linemen will miss at least one game due to injury. So what's plan B then? I think you look at the offensive tackle position, and we're still figuring out who's going to be the left tackle starter, whether it's Braxton Jones or second round pick Ozzie Trapillo or last year's third round pick Karana Magaji. And presumably, if there's an injury at offensive tackle, we kind of know that the loser of that left tackle battle will fill in at either left tackle or right tackle if there would be an injury at one of those spots. So if Trapillo is the backup, then he could fill in at left or right tackle. Or if Braxton Jones ends up being the backup, and he could fill in at either tackle spot. One of those guys is probably your top swing tackle. And that feels to me like good enough. Again, you always want even better backup off of the best possible backups you can get at all times. I get it. But like, if you feel like either Jones or Trapillo are starting caliber players right now, you might have a starting caliber backup then, and you could feel a little bit better about somebody having to plug in at either spot in the short term there to give you a good option there. But on the interior, you've got Ryan Bates and then a bunch of players with very little to none NFL experience there. And so maybe you feel like if any of those 3 guys gets hurt, if specifically one of the 3 guys gets hurt, Ryan Bates pops in at left guard, center, or right guard, any of the 3 spots, and you feel like you can get by with Ryan Bates because he does have experience starting at multiple spots on the offensive line. He was a starter for the Bills and has played both guard and center spots, and it was kind of what you traded him for, was for that versatility and that reliability on the interior. That you're pretty good with one injury on the interior. But we've seen even in recent years with the Chicago Bears that even one injury isn't always enough. One good backup isn't always enough. We've seen the backup get hurt and they go down to the third string, whether it's Doug Kramer or Bill Murray during this past season, or you've got a backup in at right guard because you cut Nate Davis, so Matt Pryor was your top backup, and then a second interior player like Tevin Jenkins gets hurt, and now you're plugging in somebody else at the left guard spot and trying to move people around and figuring out how you can get the best possible lineup. Ryan Bates was in there, right? There was such a musical chairs of the interior of the offensive line in recent years. And you can point to that and say, well, they had an injury-prone left guard in Tevin Jenkins and an inconsistent, unavailable player in Nate Davis. So, they've moved on from those guys and they've replaced them. So that problem should be solved. And in theory, yeah, that was a big part of the impetus to upgrade the offensive line, was to not only get better players, but get more consistent, more available players. And they certainly got that in Joe Thuney, who has been one of these pretty rare NFL offensive line Ironmen. You look back over the last 4 seasons, he's missed 2 games, both of them in 2022, but missed no games last year, no games the year before that, missed 2 games in 2022, and then no games in 2021. Like, he's only missed a couple of games over the course of his entire NFL career, and he's been doing it for, 9 years now. So, like, Joe Thuney, we can absolutely expect to be there every game. Drew Dalman, a little less so, and Jonah Jackson, much less so. And that was true last season, and they've each had their own varying amounts of history of injuries that are going to make this Bears interior offensive line depth that much more important. If you look back at even just this past season, right? Okay, Joe Thuney played 98% of the snaps, I think, for the Kansas City Chiefs this past season. You know, that we know of him as a real Iron Man. But Drew Dalman played only 9 games this past season for the Falcons. That represented about 48% of the snaps for him. Which, okay, yeah, 1 season injury is fine, but the year before that, he missed 3 games with an ankle injury also. So we're on back-to-back seasons of Drew Dalman missing time with an ankle injury. And of course, like, when he's been on the field, he's been a very good center. But we may have gotten, I'm not going to say we got spoiled by Coleman Shelton because he was not a very good center, but he played 99% of the snaps last season. Like, he did not miss a game. He didn't miss any time with the starters. I mean, there was times they put in backups, like at the end of a game, garbage time he came out of the game for. But other than that, he was out there all the time for the Bears at center. And as much as he wasn't very good, he was at least healthy and consistently available. And we haven't necessarily seen as much of that from Drew Dalman. Even if you go back 2 years ago, Drew Dalman in 2023 in the Falcons offense was on the field for about 82% of the snaps. So he missed a few games, but was still able to catch most of it. But even in the last 2 seasons, 82% and 48%, even at best, he's missing almost 20% of the snaps. That's going to mean multiple games worth of somebody else filling in there, which is fine if it's just Ryan Bates and that's the only backup that you have to get in your lineup because the rest of your offensive line is so healthy. But then you factor in Jonah Jackson, who has the much, much more checkered recent injury history. Of course, last season with the Rams, I think it's been pretty well documented, trying to play different positions and dealing with injuries throughout that process. He only played 24% of the Rams' offensive snaps last season. But even 2 years ago, his last year with the Lions, he was on the field for about 68% of their snaps. So about 2/3 of the time he was on the field in 2023. So about 1/3 of the time they had to have a backup in there. The year before that, he was at about 75%. So in the last 3 seasons, he's missed a quarter of one season, a third of another season, and then 3/4 of another season. So it's a little bit hard for me to count on Jonah Jackson playing every game. I think we can count him playing maybe even 75% of the game, 75% of the snaps. But that still means 4 games-ish would be, the math there would be he's out for 4-ish games. So if Jonah Jackson misses 3 or 4 games and Drew Dalman misses 2 or 3 games or whatever that it ends up mathing out to be, you better hope those aren't at the same time, because then what are you going to on the offensive line? Okay, Ryan Bates can fill in for one and you feel like okay with him being in there for a game or 2. But if Ryan Bates is already filling in one spot and another interior guy goes down, even just for a half of a game, who's plugging in next? Rookie 6th-round pick Luke Newman out of Michigan State, who was a small school transfer? Or do you go back to Bill Murray, who was an undrafted free agent who had a couple of nice flashes last season, but let's not get too carried away with here. He played in 3 games this past season for the Chicago Bears, right? Not like some major player. He played a total of 42 offensive snaps. So it's not as though we saw Bill Murray prove himself as some bona fide stud top backup that we can be super, super confident in. He looked good for 42 snaps, but like that's not very much. Or there's always Doug Kramer. Like that to me is where it feels just a little bit more precarious on the interior than I would like, right? It's not that they have to go out and trade for some big name player or go get some amazing starting caliber interior backup offensive lineman, but just maybe somebody with a little more experience, a little more reliability, and there's still plenty of like cheap veteran names out there in free agency. Will Hernandez from the Arizona Cardinals, Daniel Brunskill from the Titans can play center and guard. Former Bear Cody Whitehair still out there as a free agent. Andrews Pete from the from the Raiders has experience with Dennis Allen and this Bears offensive line coach. You've also got Nick Gates from the Eagles, who played for Eric Bieniemy on the Washington Commanders and started a few games for them at center. He can play guard. Mark Lewinsky of the Colts. Like, it's not as though there are no options to still add a better backup player than Luke Newman and Bill Murray, right? We're not looking for a player who's going to be better than Jonah Jackson, just someone who's a better backup option that you feel like, okay, I can relax and know that, hey, if there's an injury, there's a little bit of something more reliable there than a rookie 6th-round pick or a former undrafted free agent. That's just where it feels really risky to me on the interior as well. We've seen what this injury risk looks like and when it can cause problems at other positions on this Bears roster. I mean, they've brought back the exact same crew they had at safety when Brisker missed most of last season, and they had to roll with multiple backups over the course of this past year. So I want to go through a couple other spots like safety that still feel to me a little bit precarious based on depth, but maybe aren't as immediately urgent pressing as certainly as edge rusher and as the concerns on the interior offensive line. Next on Locked On Bears. Edge and O-line are the two spots where it feels like if you have to go to backups there, you're really screwed because of how important having a good pass rush is going to be to this Bears defense and having a good offensive line is going to be for Caleb Williams and DeAndre Swift and this Bears offense. Like, those are going to be such critical positions that don't have much depth that I would rather overdo the depth there, even if it means maybe leaving a little less depth at other spots that are also, I think, a little precarious, but maybe just a little bit less comparatively impactful as the trenches there. Like we briefly started talking about the safety position. That's another spot here where I wanted to see the Bears upgrade the depth there, and they opted not to, and they didn't, quote unquote, have to. I mean, they didn't have to re-sign anybody under contract. They had all 4 of their top 4 safeties from this past season. The problem is, we know that Jaquan Brisker has really struggled with staying healthy in recent seasons, largely not his fault. Concussions that have been stacking up, but like the more concussions you get, the more of an injury risk it feels like there is to, try and replace him, and to count on him being out there all the time is something that is a little bit tricky. So they had to go to a lot of Elijah Hicks last season, but then Elijah Hicks got hurt. And so then they went to a lot of Jonathan Owens, and they were on, what kind of felt like 3rd string safety duties then. And Elijah Hicks and Jonathan Owens are pretty good special teams players who are not complete liabilities on defense. But they're not necessarily players I really want to rely on for multiple games, right? Like, okay, middle of the game, Jaquan Brisker goes down with a sprained his ankle or whatever, and then Elijah Hicks or Jonathan Owens comes and plays the second half, you'll be fine. Like that, you're not going to lose the game because that backup player came in there. But, if there's, heaven forbid, another concussion or some other injury to either Brisker or Byard, and they're going to miss 6 weeks, well, then all of a sudden, the likes of Elijah Hicks or Jonathan Owens becomes a player that opposing quarterbacks and offensive coordinators are going to target and go after and say, hey, there's a weak link we can try and exploit in coverage. And we certainly saw this in the Detroit Lions game, the second Lions game. I think that was the one that Matt Eberflus got fired after, or was that the first Lions game? Regardless, week 16 against the Lions. Ben Johnson himself saw Jonathan Owens in that secondary, targeted him 8 times, gave up 7 catches for 160 yards and 3 touchdowns. Like, the smart offensive coordinators find the weak link in your secondary, your weakest coverage player, try and get their best matchups against him and exploit it. And Jonathan Owens was certainly a part of that last season. Elijah Hicks has been that at times for the Bears as well. And it's a spot that is not as critically important as offensive and defensive line for this team's success overall, but you still feel like you'd like, if you have a little bit of cap space and there are cheap players available in free agency who would represent upgrades, why not make your team a little bit better if it's not really going to cost you in any meaningful way, especially when you look at the free agent landscape and you can see safeties who have past experience in Dennis Allen's defense that wouldn't be much of a learning curve for them to plug and play and show up at training camp, like Marcus Williams, like Von Bell, like there's a few, Marcus May, there's a few others around the free agent group that they didn't just play in the Saints last year, but earlier in their careers, they've played in this Saints defense. And boy, wouldn't it be nice to have a player like that as your backup safety, just because of the real risk that comes with Brisker. Even though Brisker, he's 100% healthy and he's put everything behind him and he should be good to go, you just, he's got to kind of earn that benefit of the doubt back. Kevin Byard's been an Iron Man. That one you don't really have to worry about, but like a Brisker alternative would be nice to have better depth, not to compete with them or to unseat them, but just to prepare for the possibility that he might continue to miss time for the third or fourth straight season of his NFL career. I also see some depth questions at linebacker, and I put this as the last spot because Tremaine Edmunds and TJ Edwards have been very reliable, consistent, healthy, durable players. I don't think TJ Edwards has missed any like non-garbage time snaps in each of his 2 seasons with the Bears. He played over 1,000 snaps each of the last 2 years. I think Tremaine Edmunds missed a few games in 2023 due to injury. I think Jack Sanborn had filled in a little bit during that time. I don't have the exact snap count numbers in front of me for him, but Edmunds missed 2 games in 2023, which isn't that much. He's been a very durable player himself over the course of his Bears career. But still, if that happens to change because injuries are unpredictable and you can't count on players being healthy literally every single season. Say it's another couple of games here or there that Edmunds misses, for example. Are you throwing rookie 4th-round pick Ruben Hippolyte into the starting lineup next to TJ Edwards then? Are you throwing former 5th-round pick Noah Sewell into that middle linebacker type spot, or special teams player Amon Anbagbamiga? Like, there's just not really any NFL experienced defensive linebacker play here. There's special teams experience here and there, but like players who have played NFL snaps on defense are not really existent in this linebacker depth. And you just feel a little bit like, hey, maybe it'd be nice to have somebody there that's just been through a little bit more. Like I mentioned former Lion linebacker Quan Alexander, right? Just somebody you'd have familiar with who's been in the NFL a while, not someone who's a starting caliber player. Like Eric Kendricks from the Cowboys is still out there, but he's going to be too expensive and will want a bigger role. But somebody like Quan Alexander, or even mentioned earlier, Jalen Reeves-Maybin from the Lions, like some Tyler Matakavich from the Steelers, a backup who will help you on the special teams, but if you have to put him in on defense, you feel like, all right, he's seen a thing or two before and you can rely on him for a game or two. I just don't like the idea of throwing a rookie or a really inexperienced player out there. And again, like opposing offensive coordinators saying, hey, there's the player we should throw at in coverage. Get my wide receiver matched up with that linebacker and just throw it over and over again, because we know Dennis Allen's going to play some man coverage. So can we get a tight end lineup with him? Like, I think offensive coordinators are smart enough to identify when a backup, especially a young, inexperienced backup, is out on the field and being able to absolutely take advantage. And that's where depth can be a problem. Now, a backup linebacker isn't going to be as big of a deal as a backup edge rusher, as a backup interior offensive lineman. So to me, it's not like priority number one, but if you're looking at like risky spots where the Bears are playing with a little fire because the depth isn't that great, you got to add linebacker to the list. I mean, I think generally they're sitting pretty good at wide receiver, at offensive tackle, at tight end with Loveland and Kmet. Quarterback obviously is kind of its own thing, because if you have an injury there, you're screwed pretty much no matter what. But running back depth is pretty good. Interior defensive line depth is good. Cornerback depth is pretty good. Like, they've got some spots where your depth is good. It's not just like, hey, look, all over the roster, you need to get better. Like, yeah, duh, you want better backups everywhere. But the more troublesome spots are the ones, to me, that I feel like they need to be addressed. And I hope to see Ryan Poles do something with them, either leading up to training camp or right away once training camp gets rolling. If the Bears do make any important transactions, you can be sure we'll break it down for you right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So I hope you'll hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you're looking for a second listen today, you can always check out the Locked On NFL podcast for more football talk, or Locked On NFL Scouting, Locked On NFL Draft as well, to really cover the league from every angle. We've got Locked On Podcast Network podcasts for all your favorite sports, all your favorite teams across the major leagues. So go listen to another Locked On Podcast Network podcast for your second listen today. Coming back tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Bears and another opportunity for you to bear down.